council members. Yeah. Hey, why am I not? Here we go. Wow. Engagement. Welcome back. It is 10:33 and we're on to our next agenda item, which is the radioactive material transport rulemaking. This is a public hearing, and Tom Jackman, Citing Policy Analyst and Rules Coordinator, will provide an overview of proposed rules and the steps in the rulemaking process to date. So, Mr. Jackman, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. For the record, my name is Tom Jackman. I'm a Citing Policy Analyst and the Rules Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Energy. I will provide a brief overview of the proposed rules and then serve as the presiding officer for today's public hearing. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then go to the next slide. One more. Okay, so the council authorized the department to file a notice of proposed rulemaking at its May 15th, 2026 meeting. The department filed that notice with the Oregon Secretary of State on May 29th, 2026. Today's hearing is an opportunity for interested persons to provide oral testimony on the proposed rule language. This is not the council's final consideration of the proposed rules, which will happen at a future council meeting. And therefore, the council is not requested to make any decisions during this agenda item. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so the proposed rules are intended to amend OAR Chapter 345, Division 60, which addresses transportation of radioactive material in Oregon. Under the existing program, fees are collected from carriers transporting certain placarded shipments of radioactive material. The Oregon Department of Energy uses that revenue to support radiation and transportation safety training for firefighters, law enforcement officers, and so on, located along radioactive material transportation routes. The current fee schedule has not been updated since 1983, and existing reserves are projected to support operations for only another 3 to 5 years. And the current rules also exclude rail shipments despite similar emergency response risks being present along those routes. Go ahead and go next slide. So the proposed rules would increase the fee for most applicable placarded truck shipments from $70 to $125 a shipment. They would increase the annual maximum permit fee from $500 to $750. They would apply this equivalent fee to all rail shipments and establish a fee for highway route controlled quantities, which include high level radioactive waste or spent nuclear fuel at a higher value, representative of the increased risk. And they would introduce a formalized 4-year cycle for future schedule review so that we don't wait 40 years before reassessing this fee. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, today's hearing is an opportunity for interested persons to provide oral testimony. But again, the council is not doing any consideration of the proposed rules. With that overview complete, I will now begin the formal public hearing. So the time is approximately 10:36 a.m. on July 24th, 2026, and I am now opening the public hearing on the proposed amendments to OAR Chapter 345, Division 60 concerning radioactive material transportation fees. I am Tom Jackman and will serve as the presiding officer for this rulemaking hearing. This hearing is intended for the receiving of comments rather than conducting any Q&A session. Council members or staff may ask a limited question when necessary to clarify testimony, but staff will generally not respond to or debate testimony during this hearing. The oral hearing will conclude today, but the public comment period will remain open. Written comments must be received by the Oregon Department of Energy no later than 5 p.m. on Friday, July 31st, 2026. Written comments may be submitted using any of the methods identified in the notice of proposed rulemaking and on the department's rulemaking webpage, or submitted to myself, Tom Jackman, at tom.jackman@energy.oregon.gov. And this email address is located on the council's website and on the rulemaking page for this rulemaking. All comments submitted prior to the written comment deadline will be provided to the council before it considers the proposed rules at a later meeting. Go ahead and go next slide. I'm going to turn it over to you for the Nancy for the. Yeah, is there anybody in the room? I don't believe so. Who's submitted anything? So is there anybody online who would like to make any comments?
I'll go ahead and review again how to raise your hand in Teams. If you're on the phone, you're going to press *5 to raise your hand. You're going to press *5 again to lower your hand when you're finished commenting. You can press *6 to unmute yourself once I unmute your mic on this end. If you are just on the webinar, you're going to go ahead and at the top of the screen, there's some icons. Click that raise your hand and that will raise it. And when you're finished, you can click it again to lower it. So I do not see any hands raised at this moment.
Give it another 30 seconds or a minute or so.
Okay, I'm still seeing none. Let's give it a last call.
All right, seeing no requests to testify, the time is approximately 10:39 a.m. and I am now closing the oral public hearing on the proposed radioactive material transportation fee rules. Again, the written public comment period will remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday, July 31st, 2026. And that concludes the hearing on this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackman, for the hearing and the overview of the information. So our next item on the agenda is a public comment period. This is an information item. The time is reserved for the public to address the council regarding any item within council jurisdiction that is not otherwise closed for comment. Pending applications for which a comment period has not yet begun or for which the oral comment period has been completed are closed for comment. Those include, among others, the Muddy Creek Energy Park preliminary application for site certificate and the Deschutes Solar and Battery Energy Storage System Facility preliminary application for site certificate. In the agenda, we have set the amount of time for individual commenters at 7 minutes. And Nancy, have you received any comment cards or have raised hands? And I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Chair. I have not received any written comments, just a double check of the room. So there are no written comments. So I do have one person with their hand up. That would be Miss Irene Gilbert. Irene, I have unmuted your mic. You can unmute on your end and you are ready to speak.
Hello. Irene Gilbert here, and I'm making a comment regarding the determination request process because of concerns regarding the impacts to public and landowners, and basically it's a public interest issue. First, I wanted to look at OAR 345-027-0357, which lists the requirements for the amendment determination request. And the first thing, number 2, it says that the department will determine if the amendment request either meets the requirement to require a amendment under 345-027-0350, or it doesn't require an amendment under 345-027-0353. So that's the first decision. And then it goes on, and if you look at 0353, it's clear that none of these changes in the siting corridor for Boardman to Hemingway are exempt from having any amendment requirement. And then under changes requiring an amendment, it does say that when there's a change in the design, operation, on and on, number 4, that could require a new condition or a change in the site certificate conditions, that does require a amendment. It goes on then to talk about in 30357 that what the process is. And it says that if a request requires an amendment, then there needs to be a written determination. It talks about in that written determination what the department is deciding. And I'm sorry if I'm stuttering here. I've got really bad back noise on mine. So. But anyway, the review under it says that the ADR decides whether or not the review needs to be under type B or type A. That's the decision that the department is making. Now, they've been getting a whole bunch of requests regarding changes to the siting corridors on the Boardman to Hemingway transmission line. Now, as it happens, I had previously gone to the Supreme Court regarding my concerns about whether or not the extended site boundary would result in the applicant moving construction corridors without full public review and amendment. So I'm reading from the judge's order on that. And the court decision is SC S071487, and the providing judge is Richon, I believe. Anyway, what he says is that basically his order says that Idaho Power can only construct the facility within the micro-siting corridors, and petitioners have not challenged construction within those corridors. And it says that I suggested that they might be able to do future construction without a full amendment process, and references your previous type C. The judge says the Idaho Power cannot make any changes in the micro-siting corridors without an amendment. And so the concern that I have is they're making changes, which is what I was concerned about, to move roads and transmission lines and different things within this huge extended site boundary. And they are doing it without a full amendment process, meaning type A or type B. And since the court in this order says that there has to be an amendment process in order to move these siting corridors, the approvals that are being done under the decision process, your decision process, ADR, are not consistent with either the rules or with this court decision. So just letting council know, you may want to do a careful review of what is actually allowed under the amendment determination process. I've been sick for a week, so I apologize. But anyway, that what it amounts to is I'm feeling an obligation to identify one of these changes and file with the Supreme Court as a public concern if the department continues to authorize these kinds of changes. And I encourage the council to determine if you want to continue allowing these changes or approving these changes after the fact. One other quick note, the request that I had asking for a redetermination of changes to the fire suppression and uh, protection rule, anyway, condition, was dismissed by the circuit court based on the attorney's arguments on council behalf that there was no amendment, there was no amendment process, there was no final order, and thus there is no court who can review any changes that you make under this amendment determination process that you have included in the site certificate. So that has been appealed to the Oregon Supreme Court because of the fact that a denial of allowing any kind of appeal when you're making changes that affect people goes against the U.S. Constitution, Amendment 5 and 14, as well as state rules and council rules that require people who are impacted to have access to due process. Okay, and again, I apologize. The backflow that I'm getting here is incredible. So, any questions?
Thank you, Miss Gilbert, and no need to apologize. We could hear you loud and clear with not much background noise. So thank you very much for your comments today. Council members, any questions? Clarifying otherwise? Okay, thank you. I do have a question just related to the comments. And certainly our discussion earlier with respect to really the amendment request from Idaho Power, but all amendment requests. I believe we look at all of the information, including court rulings, whatever, as part of our determination. And so I see head nodding in the back, but Secretary Cornett?
Yeah, and just as a reminder, particularly probably for the new council members, so, any changes that are proposed from what is approved by council, there are some very minor things that can be done, but ultimately, a certificate holder, has to work within the bounds of the determination, the findings, the conditions. There is a process, the amendment determination process, that we have that a certificate holder can come in and say, here's what we want to do. We don't think this triggers an amendment. And I'm going to read the requirements for what requires an amendment. Again, we refer to these as the three coulds. So this is in Oregon Administrative Rule 345, 027, 0350, sub 4. And these are changes requiring an amendment. So this is proactively, prospectively, what has to happen, or what triggers an amendment. So the design, construction, or operation of the facility in a manner different from the description in the site certificate if the proposed change could result in a significant adverse impact that the council has not addressed in an earlier order and the impact affects a resource or interest protected by an applicable law or council standard. That's could 1. Could 2, could impair the certificate holder's ability to comply with a site certificate condition. And then could 3, could require a new condition or change to a condition in the site certificate. So for a certificate holder to say, we're proposing this change, we don't think an amendment is required, they evaluate it under that language. And if they don't, we do. So they submit it to us, we do the evaluation based on those ideas, those three coulds, and we make then the determination, do we agree with them? Do we not agree with them? Is there enough sort of information or evidence that they submitted to us to justify that those three coulds are not triggered, meaning an amendment is not required? So that's what we do. That's how we evaluate that. Then, as we've talked about before, we provide that information on the website. We provide notice. We bring it to council. Council has the opportunity to review that. and then raise that as individual agenda items if you want to evaluate the staff's determination, whether we agree with the certificate holder or whether we disagree with them. You can evaluate that, or you can just not respond and say, okay, we looked at it, we basically tacitly, agree with staff by not kind of commenting or responding. So that's your options. So we do take that very seriously. And, as we've talked about, and we've evaluated these, and we do not believe any of the ones that obviously that we have recommended or determined that don't trigger an amendment. That's based on our analysis.
Thank you. And I think the analysis was pretty in-depth. So thank you for that. But thank you very much, Ms. Gilbert, for your comments. And I think we have no more questions.
Okay, and it does look like we have one other person with their hand raised. But just to make note, Ms. Gilbert, the reason you're having that bounce back in your room is because you were signed in twice onto this webinar. So if you want to shut one of those off for future, that will help your situation, though we could understand you just fine. All right, Les, you are unmuted. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute your mic on your end. Mr. Poole, would you like to make a comment? You would just need to unmute the mic on your
Mr. Poole, if you are wanting to give comment, now is the time.
All right, well, maybe we'll circle back to you.
Secretary Cornett.
For the record, Todd Cornett. There's one public comment that I wanted to make note of. So we received an email with a public comment. Nancy provided that to council members just prior to the council meeting this morning. So this is from Obsidian Renewables. It's dated July 24th, 2026. And the heading is Oregon Data Center Advisory Committee, comments on the importance of understanding counterfactuals. We believe this may be misunderstood who council is and what our role is. So I don't believe that this is sort of related to a public comment to council. So I'm not going to read this into the record, but for the public record, it has been provided to council. You have this. We will include this as an attachment to the draft meeting minutes for your review for next month. So just to be clear, we are adding it as a public comment and treating it as such. And I have not had a chance to review it myself, but just based upon the heading, it appears that it's to another body, which is the Oregon Data Center Advisory Committee rather than the Energy Facility Siting Council. But again, whether that was purposeful or mistaken, we'll treat it as a public comment.
Thank you for that. Council members, anything else? Has Mr. Poole come back to us?
All right, we're going to try Mr. Oh, no, he has left. But that's okay. We do now have a hand raised from Wendy King. All right, Wendy, I have unmuted your mic on my end. You can go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Sorry to be a pest. I am Wendy King. I reside in Redmond, Oregon. This is concerning B2H and the Myers Farm, in which B2H passes through their farmland. I just want to convey my concern that the intended purpose of the condition Gen HC02 and ultimately the Historical Properties Management Plan has left our family cultural resource vulnerable. The B2H project has impacted our resource, and due to inaccurate findings, and by the original archaeological surveyor. ODOE has determined that after their hired archaeological surveyor determined that the findings that the original surveyor made were inaccurate or inconclusive. It continues to be inconclusive, and the findings of ODOE is that everything that was found is outside their jurisdiction, and they're not able to make Idaho Power compliant with the plan because it's outside their jurisdiction. And this is because of disputes between SHPO, State Historical Preservation Office, and the BLM. It's quite a problem. I once believed that the ODOE's purpose for conditions and mitigation plans was to protect Oregonians and their properties. Our cultural resource has been allowed to fall through the cracks and will continue to endure impacts of construction, while we, as landowners, are not legally able to further collect any of our artifacts to prevent looting and to prevent them from destruction without the expense of hiring our own archaeological group, gather a permit, and then that would cost us thousands of dollars. So I just wanted to let the site council know that this has not been a good path for us, and we continue to see impacts, and our hands are tied. And the folks at ODOE that could possibly remedy this for us have chosen to consider it outside of their jurisdiction. And I believe that is maybe once again an advocate for the utility and lack of concern for impacted landowners. So I appreciate the opportunity to make this comment.
Thank you, Ms. King. Any questions from the council? We are going to get more detailed information about this topic, but appreciate your comments.
All right. Thank you, Ms. King. Les, I told you we'd circle back around to you, so here I come again. So I am unmuting your mic. Now you just need to unmute on your end, and you can speak.
Hello, appreciate your circling back for me. Yeah, for some reason it locked up and would not let me activate the mic. I've used the system many times, so sorry about that. I had a couple of brief comments and some earlier discussion on the Buckley issue opened the door, and my comments are very, very basic. I've seen a pattern of what I would call inadequate tools, specifically maps, related to projects across Oregon. And as I mentioned earlier, it's an ongoing issue. I find it unacceptable that after 2 years, or within 2 years of the time of a NOI application, the time comes for applicants to move forward. And during that 2 years, everything that's occurred has typically, in the record, there's inadequate maps, maps that don't show significant features, inadequately labeled highways. It's just not acceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And it's an issue where standards need to be set. It's unfortunate because I know as someone who's done a lot of land use work, when I do an application for something, I'm very specific about any affected property, any road, any street, and et cetera. And I understand that when an initial application is made, there's no micrositing, there's no specifics, but this transcends that. I just strongly recommend that the rulemaking be modified or policy be modified so that maps and depictions of what is being planned, or at least a good idea of what's being planned, is available. And I just strongly encourage you to raise the bar and establish better standards from the start. There's no reason for an NOI application to be as inadequate as many as I have seen. So I appreciate any effort or thought that could go into improving the map aspect or other images, but specifically maps that are put out by the applicants. I'm completed with my comments, and thank you as always.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. And I believe Ms. Esterson, in her previous comments before the council, said that she would certainly be willing to talk more about the maps and improvements that could be made. So I encourage you to reach out to staff, particularly Ms. Esterson, to dig into that with more detail. Thank you for your comments today. We appreciate you being here. Councilor Calderon.
Yep, Denise Calderon for the record. I would just like to respond to that very briefly. As part of projects, there's more than what the publicly available map is available to you, sir. I'm not sure if it's a confidentiality matter that other maps are not publicly available, but rest assured that the standards are there, and they are met when the ODOE approves such projects. So I apologize on behalf of the department that they're just not publicly available. So I mean, exactly like Chair Condon stated, please reach out to specific staff responsible for such matters. And if they are allowed to share that with the public, I'm pretty sure they will. At least I would hope so. So thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Cornett.
Yeah, didn't really intend this to be like a bigger conversation. It's probably worthwhile. I think it's important to recognize there are varying kind of levels of maps. The public notice is one thing. That's not everything. The public notice is basically a vicinity map to try to make people aware of the location of the project. It could be better. I appreciate the comments. We can be better with those and more clear, and we take that very seriously, but recognize that is not the exhaustive map. And because these facilities are so big, the scale has to be small enough to where you can get the entire facility on a single map. And again, the purpose is not to make people fully aware of all the details of the project on a vicinity map in a public notice. That's a starting point. And I recognize not everybody has access to the internet, and that gets complication. But the fact is, if you go into the notice of intent, all the exhibits, if you go into the application, all of the exhibits, there are very detailed maps in those dealing with those specific standards, those issues, those resources. If you access the ARESA tool, and these things are all linked in the notices that we provide, the online mapping tool allows people to zoom in very, very detailed and see, and change the different sort of resource maps that exist, whether it's on an aerial photograph or other things. They can see things in a much more clear and detailed way. So the notice, just to be clear, is not intended to be the exhaustive understanding of the project. It just is not. It is a starting point. And it's not practical for us to put in 30 different maps on a notice to have that level of detail that I think would be what, individual landowners might want to see in terms of, the project in relation to their property. That's just not practical because of the scale of these projects, some of them being 16 square miles. They're big projects.
And so just to clarify, if Mr. Poole or anybody else reaches out to staff,
there is a way to get to that level of information either through the website on the documents themselves, or we'd be happy to navigate. Staff would be happy to navigate with them.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Further comment? Any further comment online?
I see no new hands raised, but Les has his hand up again. So I'm not sure if he just hadn't lowered it. So let me open his mic in case he had another comment.
Yeah, yes, I just want to reiterate that I understand the information is available as one searches through documentation, but the responses that I just heard do not address a simple request that when a notice is put out that they're going to apply, that the main highways, the roads, the major geographic features are often not clearly labeled and oftentimes not labeled at all. The basic maps from WordGo are not adequate, and encouraging us to dig deeper or go through the file doesn't change the fact that when a notice is put out, a reasonable, understandable map, not a detailed map, but a reasonable map that can be understood by the public needs to be included. And I will follow up with you folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if there are no more comments, we will close the public comment period now and move on to our next item, which is Soil Structural and Waste Minimization Standard, Phase 3, Informal Rulemaking Initiation. This is an action item, and Tom Jackman is again with us, and he is the Rules Coordinator.
Yep, my name is Tom Jackman. I'm, as the chair said, the Rules Coordinator for the council. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here today to discuss the initiation of the informal rulemaking part of the rulemaking process for the soil, structural, and waste minimization standards. For those of you who've been paying attention, this is another, would be the second sort of cluster of standards that we are hoping to address and update as part of our multi-phase process to updating the council's citing rules. And this phase is focused on updating the council standards. So yeah, the phase 1 and phase 2 parts of this rulemaking effort focus primarily on the structure and clarity of the application requirements. This phase and this rulemaking is focused on ensuring that the information requirements are both sufficient and necessary, that we don't have, we're not asking for things in a duplicative fashion. We're not asking for things that we end up not using, and ensuring that we aren't in a situation where we are frequently finding ourselves submitting requests for additional information to applicants such that it would make more sense to clarify the information requirements up front to minimize that sort of wasted time. Yeah, so today's staff is here to recommend that we proceed on these rulemaking standards. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So you can kind of see here, this is just to give you an idea of the totality of the sort of, not just the council standards, but sort of what we're looking at in terms of, from a rulemaking approach, the existing and hopefully to be wrapped up in the relatively near future rulemaking deals with organizational expertise and retirement and financial assurance. And then this would be 3 additional rules. So that would be 5 of the, I don't want to count them up, but you can see the total there is a pretty good chunk of the rules. So this is a multi-year project to get through all the council standards, but it's not going to take, infinity time. We do see sort of a forecasted finish to this effort. Go ahead and go next slide. So why bundle these three together? Well, we're bundling them just from an efficiency standpoint, but also because there is some natural overlap between these beyond just not wanting to do 16 separate rulemakings. These three standards together address related issues concerning physical site characteristics and construction phase impacts. So we have overlapping information requirements related to site conditions, soil, erosion, stormwater, spills, and waste generation. And in some cases, there are related conditions. So it makes sense to sort of review these together, which will hopefully reduce unnecessary repetition and present the required information the council will need to make required findings in the future regarding these standards. So, and just for everyone who's paying attention, the goal here with these updates is not to reduce the substantive protection. The goal is to make the process more efficient by improving clarity and ensuring that we have sort of proper administration around these standards. Any questions from the council regarding the scope or intended purpose?
Thank you. I do have a question.
Sure.
And it's with respect to the word modernize and what that means. Like modernize requirements for solar wind. Do we find them out of date because of technical changes in equipment or?
Oh, you're talking because I used that word in the staff report.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't remember if that's on the next. If we're gonna.
I think it is on the next slide.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and go next slide.
Third one down.
Yeah. So the scope of this rulemaking, the proposed scope, and of course, council can direct us to do less or more, is to, as I said, sort of evaluate where we potentially have some duplication, ensure that we have sufficient information that we're asking for so that we don't have to go back and ask for more information. And then here in this modernization, this is sort of related to the RAI, request for additional information. When these rules were originally written, there were no solar projects being presented to council. It's not that we used to have rules regarding these and that the technologies has changed. Council wasn't considering these types of projects at all. So we may change nothing, but one of the goals of doing these evaluations of the council standards is to ensure that we are getting the information that might be relevant to these types of projects that were not necessarily relevant previously, because the impacts related to, in this case, soil structural waste minimization are going to be different for solar, wind, battery storage than they might have been for a natural gas facility. So is there information related to these types of installations that we weren't asking for that should be in rules? That's probably something that's been popping up in RAIs, for example, where we sort of identify that we need that, but it wasn't in rules, so they weren't providing it.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Byer. Sorry, Councillor Devlin first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the request here, and I'm very supportive of the request. I only make one request, actually. When you look for people on the committee for waste minimization, that you find somebody or somebodies that have practical experience, not simply advocacy. I've always had this argument with people, and it dates back to my years on Metro and solid waste, which is literally like in a different lifetime. People believe a lot of things are recyclable simply because it has something on the container that says it's recyclable. We're not dealing necessarily with that. But to be recyclable, there has to be a market for what is being used. There has to be a processor. Sometimes it might be more environmentally sound to actually, I remember an argument here some years ago, maybe last year, about recycling wind turbine blades. I knew that within a relatively short distance of where that project is one of the largest landfills in the region. It might have been more practical and more environmentally sensitive to actually put them in the landfill there, rather than having to transport them somewhere, and the environmental impact of that, and whether or not there was actually a processor available or a market for it. So somebody with some practical experience, not simply advocacy.
Yeah, definitely take that recommendation. Of course, I'd love to be able to force people to be on the rack, but I'm at the mercy of folks who are willing to participate. And we try to space the racks out amongst, just the calendar year, and also really try to be efficient with the rack time. I try not to schedule super long rack meetings so that I can convince people that it's not going to be soul crushing effort to join our rulemaking advisory committee, and I know some folks don't have that, luxury when they have these super complicated rulemakings, and you need an 8-hour rulemaking meeting to really get through stuff. So I'm sensitive to trying to have a diverse and practical rulemaking advisory committee that is, that can include advocates, but also folks who have practical experience and can bring that experience to bear to ensure that we have the best rules we can.
Thank you. And just a reminder to council members, you're more than welcome to participate on RAC. And I think that is by choice. And it's good to have somebody on the council with waste minimization experience.
Yeah, it sounds like I heard somebody mention that they had some experience, practical experience.
Madam Chair, I have the same argument at home because people still try to put things in recycling that they've already been told are not recyclable.
It's an ongoing battle, I think, in every household. Thank you, Councillor Beyer.
So I'm going to step back.
Can you pull the
your mic?
Yeah, there you go.
I have a stepping back kind of picture. I get the linkage between soil protection and the structural standards. It's a stretch for me to jump to waste minimization and why we're including this. I go back to your statement, well, it's kind of the construction bit, but it hasn't quite worked for me. So help me understand this, because if I don't understand this, maybe other people don't. I might just be slow. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, it's an important question, and it's an important consideration, especially when we're looking to invite folks on the rack. We don't want to invite somebody who's maybe super interested in waste minimization, but not interested in the others. And so, we don't want to waste people's times. We had that same consideration for the previous rack where we only combined 2. I'm going to turn to Secretary Cornett to answer this particular question regarding waste minimization.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a great answer to your question. I mean, the difficulty is, we want to try to bulk these in a reasonable way. And yeah, could we not include waste minimization? But then is it a big enough one to do it by itself? And does it link to any other ones? So it's kind of a bigger conversation of not just how does it relate to this, but does it relate to anything else? And is it, and it wouldn't be a wasted effort to do it by itself, but would it be an outsized effort to do it by itself? And are there enough sort of linkages to these other sort of elements that, yeah, the standards or requirements, what we're talking about is different, but it's also about, protecting the soil, making sure that structures are sited and designed, not on geohazards or, flooded areas or certain things. And then the waste minimization also kind of has some of those elements as well. It's a stretch. I totally agree. So I think your question is valid. I think my only answer is, if not here, where, and is it worthwhile to do it there as well?
In my mind, it went to public services or something like this, because local governments generally provide waste end of life kind of things, which isn't the same as minimization. But that was the only place I could put it, and that wasn't great either. So,
and one more reason I think that kind of justifying it here is there's a lot of interest right now, and there may be some legislation related to this. There's much more interest, I think, to Councilmember Devlin's, sort of responses. I think people think there's a lot more opportunities to recycle these than there actually are. I think, there's articles even within the agency in the biennial energy report, they're looking at, what are the opportunities to recycle, renewable energy projects. And I think, the short answer is we don't know, because it's not 30 years from now when these facilities are really going to be taken apart. Are there going to be, it's not just can they be recycled? Is there a market? Is that financially viable? We don't know. And so I think there's a lot of interest right now, and it may be valuable to get ahead of the legislative session to have some of those conversations to help inform that. So that's part of the other reason why it's in here as well.
And
Councillor Devlin.
sound like I have a lot of background in this.
Too late.
But I think one of the things that you have to think about in terms of this is that part of this planning shouldn't be at the end of life process. It should be at the beginning. Now, I don't know what is practical, but in some ways, some of these facilities, what materials are being used, how they're being maintained, may make a lot of impact on whether or not they can be recycled in the future, or some of them reused in other capacities. And I think we have to think about that. That's one of the biggest problems on particularly the residential side, with the extensive packaging that many of the items have that we purchase. Many of them now are made so that they're more recyclable, but there still are so many that are not. And there are so many that literally have multiple levels of packaging that aren't really necessary.
Secretary Cornett.
Just a quick response, because I think it is important. And then, I did sort of say end of life, and I think it is important. We are seeing repowering of wind turbines. So nacelles and blades are being taken out, and, does it make sense to chop them up and grind them to be a concrete additive? Well, if there's no market locally, what's the carbon footprint of sending it to Missouri versus putting it, in the landfill in Arlington? And these are important questions. I don't particularly know the answers to, what's the relative value, but I think also we really don't know a lot about solar. We have a lot of people saying, okay, solar panels are going to last for 10 years. So if you have a life cycle of 40 years, are they going to be replaced, 2 or 3 times? We don't know that. I don't think anybody knows that at this point, because solar projects, utility scale solar projects, are new enough where we don't have any data. It could be less frequent. It could be more frequent. There could be, huge increases in efficiency of solar panels that all of a sudden they're all going to get taken out in 5 years and replaced, or maybe not, and they last a lot longer. There's just a lot we don't know about this. So, certainly the end of life, and thinking about that, but there's also, this won't be the only time we look at this standard. I think we're going to start to be informed in the coming years, and we would probably want to have, more thoughts, more ideas on how to deal with these, as these components become replaced throughout the life cycle. What do we do? What do we require? But again, at the end of the day is, can they be recycled? Absolutely. Will they be recycled? We do not know.
Yes, and thank you. And that was the structural was the tie for me on the waste minimization. Is if you're doing it, you're looking at the structure in the beginning. That was the tie for me. But I agree with you, Councillor Byer. It was kind of okay. What is the catch here? But
I think just to add another thought to this, one of the reasons why, because initially we only had soil protection and structural, is that a part of the effort that's been done with the first sort of phase 2 rulemaking, and part of the reason why it's been sort of delayed a little bit for those of you who are paying attention on that one, is that we've evaluated something that I hadn't initially thought of myself initially, is that, instead of just updating the information requirements, we've been looking at shifting some of those information requirements to be mandatory conditions. So I think there was sort of a similar view on these 3 standards together in terms of like how much of them are maybe suitable to be shifted from initial information requirements to just And for those who don't get what I'm saying here, just imagine that we get these submissions from applicants, the council reviews them, and the result is, okay, great, you can build this, but here are these 3 conditions that you need to include. If we're getting all these different projects submitted and people are submitting different types of information, but the end result is always the same conditions, then does it make sense to evaluate it up front over and over again? And so, yeah, we are definitely looking at all the standards, and we may not, again, do anything. We may not change anything with respect to how we're approaching these, but we are certainly going to consider whether or not we are going to propose to council that we shift some of these upfront information requirements to just saying, great, you're building a solar facility. We know that means you're going to need to do the following. You don't need to submit anything to us because we've now looked at 20 of these, and the end result is always going to look the same. So I think that maybe drove a little bit of pulling waste minimization in.
Thank you. And just one other question. Sorry, Councilor Wall.
No, thank you, Chair. So I'll get off waste for a minute and stop beating you up on it. The soil and structural, as I in a previous life, I lived as an action officer for a wind turbine that had free spun and decided to know itself as one piece. And so I've seen the results of some of these items. One thing I'd ask is, as you review soil and structural, that you don't take anything away. If anything, add on to some of the requirements and be specific with it. Ensure that, okay, for a solar field, we probably don't need to go down 50, 60 feet on soil analysis to see if it's structurally sound or not. But on a wind farm, we need to be very specific about where we're going to be placing these. As we move on, they get older, but the soil changes faster than we do, and it can become unstable very. And I've seen it on topple in areas that have way more wind than we do, Southern Europe specifically. The soil changes very quickly, and here in the state, may not feel the earthquakes, but that'd be my request, please.
Definitely. Thank you.
Councilor Calderon.
Thank you. Yeah, Denise Calderon here for the record. I also want to remind the council that one of the reasons we exist is because of nuclear energy. And at the time, wastewater is a byproduct of nuclear energy generation. And I know right now we're focusing on renewable energy, traditionally known as battery, solar, wind. But I know the state is also focused very heavily, or has intent to, on geothermal. And that will also produce what, I mean, because I'm in the water space, right? So I know that has wastewater associated with it. So it's good to think about these things while you're producing these more efficient rulemaking, right? Nuclear is exploding in the country, right, by the current administration. That may not impact Oregon, but we don't want to be left behind either as a state. We want to be very knowledgeable on what nuclear energy generates as waste. Again, right, in this modern time. And hydrogen energy is also another type of renewable energy that is, in my opinion, well, no, you don't need my opinion, but that's what I wanted you to kind of also remember. Oh, and fusion. Fusion will also generate wastewater, which is tied into this, because my understanding is in the past, because there was no EPA rules or DEQ, Oregon State, they used to just dump it into the soil. So this may tie into your question, like, why is it combined? Well, there was such a time where there was no regulation and it was all related.
Yeah, and we have actually had some representatives reach out to us to request information about the setting process for geothermal just in the last few weeks. So yeah.
Other comments on that topic? Okay, I just have one more, and again, we probably talked about this before. The use of informal rulemaking. How does this feed into formal rulemaking?
Yeah, so there's really, I like to think about it as like there's two phases, and we call it informal because it's not driven by statute. So there are recommendations by the Secretary of State and by in rules, but essentially as an agency and, as a sort of governing body, and I have a smoke detector that's going off at my house, but, so it's overriding my do not disturb, but, false alarm, my wife is telling me. Where was I?
Well,
Oh, yes, something about a smoke alarm. No, literally, where was I?
formal-
Oh, yes. Okay. All right, I'm back on track. I'm back on track. So we are allowed to approach the rulemaking process however we want in terms of sort of developing draft rules, doing research, identifying, what the scope of a rulemaking should be. And there's some agencies that approach this maybe differently depending on there's the stakeholders and, the level of interest in a particular set of rules. But once you sort of make a decision about what you want to propose as an agency, that kicks off the formal portion, which is then heavily regulated. There's minimum days, there's minimum people that you have to provide notice to, you have to provide notice to certain legislators in a certain fashion, which is why we call it the formal rulemaking process. So, but the real easy way to think about it is there's the part where we figure out the draft language that we want to propose and have the public opinion and the legislative opinion feedback on. And then there's the part where we actually get that feedback. So this would be the start of the beginning of the process where we explore this, we sort of finalize the scoping, we develop the, what we think should be the approach, we form the RAC, which is again optional. We don't have to have a RAC. But we try to have rulemaking advisory committees whenever the rulemakings are more substantive in nature, which this most certainly is, to ensure that we get that the language we do propose during the formal period is reflective of the constituents and those who are most concerned about what these rules would look like.
Madam Chair, since I've done my share of muddying the water here, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Oh, hold on one sec. Go one more slide, I think.
One more.
Yes, this was just, I think we've already touched on this, but essentially we're hoping to have a RAC of approximately 10 to 12 persons reflective of everybody who would, potentially have some constructive feedback on this, including members of the public, energy developers, power providers, resource groups, any tribes who are interested, and then of course any local governments or agency partners who have specific knowledge, practical knowledge regarding these subjects. Yeah.
This slide this is the slide. I'm almost out of power here. That prompted the informal versus formal, because this slide looked more formal to me given the RAC, but it's just.
So it's just semantics. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Beyer.
Just one comment on soil protection. We have seen several soil compliance reports.
Sorry.
Continue.
I'm distracted. We've seen several compliance reports about violations of erosion and sediment control conditions. And so as we go forward with the soil protection structural bit of this, want to keep in mind what we're seeing at the other end from a compliance perspective. A lot of that I understand is on Department of Environmental Quality with their 401 whatever certification, but making sure that our expectations in our rulemaking for soil protection align with what we expect to see in terms of compliance with any of those erosion and sediment control issues. Because we get a number of compliance things there. So it's our chance to kind of address that. So thank you.
Thank you. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, we certainly, the experience of the application process itself is definitely driving how how we're taking a look at each of these, standard reviews. So to the extent we've been getting a lot of the similar types of questions or issues or problems related to a given standard, that's definitely going to be a heavy consideration.
Madam Chair, if you're ready.
Councillor Devlin.
Chair Condon, I move that the council initiate the soil, structural, and waste minimization standard Phase 3 rulemaking with the scope and objectives recommended by staff and approve the creation of a rulemaking advisory committee as presented in the staff report. I further move that the council delegate the authority to appoint specific members to the rulemaking advisory committee to the department.
Thank you, Councillor Devlin. Do we have a second? Councillor Walton.
I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Secretary Cornett?
Richard Devlin,
Aye.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Denise Calderon,
Yes.
Les Walton.
Yes.
Motion carries. Chair Condon.
Thank you all. And now moving on to, thank you, Mr. Jackman. And now we move on to our annual process improvement plan, which is an information item presented by BB Bartley, Operations and Policy Analyst. And great backup for Nancy Hatch when she's gone. Thank you.
Hello, Council. For record, BB Bartley. I will be presenting on what's historically been the Operations and Policy Analyst Process Improvement Plan, but realistically has been process improvements that the entire department has undertaken over the course of the past year. And especially for our new members, I kind of want to framework this a little bit for you all. To give some kind of background information, some understanding of like what this is and why I'm up here, once a year. We usually do the annual process improvement plan based on the fiscal year. So you usually see me in June, July, or August, kind of depending on what other what agenda items there are. So basically our annual work plan is kind of used to focus our current process improvement activities and report on the completion of kind of what we did in the previous fiscal year to help move the department to, be further kind of efficient in our overall processes and take a look at what is and isn't working and make adjustments from there. The work plan helps provide direction and priorities for the siting division staff's efforts beyond our day-to-day activities and other established responsibilities. Next slide, please. When we look at the annual work plan and kind of how we framework it, we use a couple different frameworks for it. Particularly within that, there's kind of three main areas. The biggest one being who participates in the FSEC process and therefore who would be the most affected by our process improvement efforts. And we try and assess kind of as we're making our plans for the process improvement efforts for the coming year, who would be the most impacted and how would they be impacted or benefited by the process improvement efforts that we're taking on. Next slide, please. I guess, sorry, one more second. To call those out specifically, the kind of the five main areas that we have identified are applicants and site certificate holders, the public, the council members, reviewing agencies and tribal governments, and obviously the team itself. Next slide. This year, we also really took a look at the strategic plan that was just created for 2026 to 2029 for the Oregon Department of Energy. And I had the privilege of being able to sit in with the overall staff committee that kind of helped create the strategic plan this year. one of the things that we all felt was really important is, in addition to kind of identifying these overall pillars, what were our actual kind of indicators that we were meeting some of these different goals for the agency. And each pillar has 2 to 3 goals along with clear action and progress indicators. And some of those apply to the department as a whole. Some of those apply to different divisions within the department. As you can see, kind of the 5 main pillars that were identified in the strategic plan. I'm really going to be specifically talking about pillar 3. Next slide, please. Which is accessible, effective services and programs. And I'm specifically talking about this one because this is really where action items for the siting division were kind of outlined as part of the strategic plan for Odo. And this one kind of really also ties into a lot of the work we already were doing, as well as the work of frameworking kind of within the main people who are affected by our programs or kind of participating in our program. So it ties pretty closely into what we already were doing, but also gives us more framework to kind of participate in larger agency efforts. Next slide, please. So from pillar 3, our specific kind of siting actions were to improve understanding and clarity of the Energy Facility Siting Council process for multiple participants, including the public, developers, and to support an efficient and meaningful energy facility siting process. And our progress indicators towards those action items is a completion of public-oriented resources that explain and increase interaction with the energy facility siting process, and completion of developer-focused resources to help navigate the siting process and standards-based requirements. So I'm very happy to kind of share with that first one. We do have a new public guide that was published in February. I find it really helpful. It's also one of the tools we've actually started using to help onboard people into the siting program as new staff, because it does give a really good kind of broader outline of what is this process, how do you interact with it. It talks a lot about the different steps and where, as a member of the public, you can kind of come in and have an impact on the process. Yep.
Councilor Byer.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you do a briefing for us at some future meeting on that guide?
Mhm.
Now, I know I can go look at it myself online, but it helps to have you explain what the intended audience is and what the outcomes are. There are all these tools available that we don't see because we don't interact as much. So like the mapping tool, the ORCIA, and this tool would be really helpful to actually see the product.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that.
Secretary Cornett.
Yeah, I just want to kind of pepper in a little bit something from the public comments about the mapping. And I think this is sort of a good opportunity. While that's not necessarily, something that's included in this specifically, I think that's a good example. And I think those comments were, sort of understood, agreed upon. I think there's been, varying consistency. We typically will take the maps that a developer gives us as part of the application and use that. Sometimes we then add that information that Mr. Poole was talking about, recognizing that, there are certain key elements, road names, communities, which may better orient people, and that might be something good for BB to be working on to develop protocols for, what kind of maps that we use in the notifications for that purpose. Again, we can't be the level of detail where everybody knows everything on a public notice map, but it can be better to better orient people as to the location. And so there are, 100% there is inconsistency because of, relying upon the maps that are given to us, but that could be something that we either more consistently develop on our own, or we require the developer and have specific requirements for them to submit maps that kind of meet that sensibility, that Mr. Poole and Mr. King or Ms. King were talking about in their comments. So just want to kind of tie that back to the process improvement can be very big things, but it can be small things, and it is helpful to hear from people and council members.
Which is also a good segue into the second item, which is completion of developer-focused resources to help navigate the siting process and the standard-based requirements. And the goal of that one was really to help create resources that give a much kind of more thorough guideline of what should be submitted at the NOI stage and then what should be submitted as a preliminary application to help reduce the need for additional requests of information on our end that in theory trying to get most of that up front rather than having a back and forth process. And I'll be speaking a little bit more about that further on. Next slide, please. The other framework that we kind of use is these siting goals that were created or they were established in the fiscal year of 2023-2024 with the assistance of a consulting group. When I started with the department, I inherited the end of this project of the creation of the goals. And the past few years of work plans that I've come up here and presented on have really been frameworked within the goals outlined. Each of these goals kind of had, again, 2 to 3 kind of more actionable items under them. In addition to that, we also this year did a internal kind of staff survey of what projects would be the most impactful or what they're seeing as kind of some of the pain points of working through the overall process and how we could kind of help address those through process improvement efforts. I do want to note that I anticipate this will be the last year of these specific goals because, as I said, they were kind of originally established a couple years ago. They're starting to become a little bit outdated. We have addressed a lot of them. So I anticipate next year, part of our process will also be really assessing which of these specific goals and action items are still relevant and which ones need to be changed or shifted in some way to address our current needs rather than historic ones. Next slide, please. So that kind of gives you all a understanding of the framework we used as I kind of go through and kind of consider what projects we'll really be focusing on this year. As you can imagine, and Todd is, or Secretary Cornett has addressed a couple times in his secretary reports. We've had a little bit of turnover this year. We've had a couple people out on various longer term sick leaves. And so the other piece of this is also that because of the position I'm in, I'm able to help kind of step in and fill gaps where needed. So we don't always get as far as we want to on the tasks that we identify in a work plan, but it is not for lack of trying or for a lot of other things, activities going on that weren't maybe identified or anticipated at the start of the fiscal year. So the ones that got, finished from start to finish this year that we were pretty proud of is the siting rulemaking updates on the ODO website. The comms team worked really hard to get ODO's website as a whole updated. And then with that, kind of reformatted how the rulemaking pages are working. So they're a little bit more user friendly. It's a little bit easier to really understand what's taking place at a rulemaking and the timeline of a rulemaking. And if you get a chance to go look at them, I highly recommend it. It's a little bit easier to navigate now than it used to be. The other one that was a big undertaking was cassette tapes. Once upon a time, all of FSEC meetings were recorded on, with a cassette tape recorder, which is very old media at this point. And so we took the opportunity before that media transfer opportunity completely died to get all of that digitized. So now we have FSEC meetings dating back from 1975 through early 2000s that were all on cassette tape originally are now digital files. And most of them, where possible, are actually accompanied by a transcript as well. And we worked with a outside contractor in order to accomplish that project because it was over 1,000 cassette tapes and hundreds of hours of FSEC, historic FSEC meetings. And then the previously mentioned citing public guide. Next slide, please. The other things that we kind of did that were accomplished by the team, and some of these were identified in the original plan from last year, but a lot of these just kind of took place naturally outside of that plan by looking at kind of some of our goals and just some of the internal needs. Again, previous versions of this plan really only frameworked what I was directly responsible for instead of calling out what the whole team was working on. So we really wanted to take the opportunity to kind of shift that focus slightly, so that there was more recognition that realistically, even if I am the lead or my position is the lead on a project, it really does take the whole team to, kind of work together to implement these process improvements. One of the big ones was a kind of refining and the weekly task tracking for siting analysts, with weekly timesheets and data tracking, and they kind of meet on a weekly cadence now and really look at their timesheets against their billable kind of target hours for the projected budget for a project against where they should be kind of in their overall tasks. And then it's given the senior policy analyst a good way to kind of really understand quickly if somebody's misunderstanding or kind of going out of scope of some of those tasks, and adjusting accordingly. We also kind of shuffled the team around a little bit. So the senior policy advisor is really focusing a lot more time and energy with the siting analysts, and the assistant director is really focused more time and energy on the compliance team. Our fiscal analyst and senior policy advisor also kind of reworked a lot of our billing tracking spreadsheets. And I think the fiscal analyst will be up here in the next couple of meetings to talk more about that. But that has really helped, again, kind of a stronger billable tracking and understanding if we're getting a little too out of scope in the review, and reassigning and reworking tasks as necessary. The entire siting team and compliance team also all completed a project management training through kind of DAS and OSU training portal thing. And we also have been exploring kind of AI tools to increase efficiency, particularly around comment processing. And then we're also exploring kind of other ways that we could be using AI tools to help us and really look where it's an appropriate tool to be used and where it's less needed. Next slide. Some of the other tasks that were taking place is a streamlined process for requests for additional information, or RAIs. They've increased and kind of created a standard tracking template sheet that is uploaded to where kind of the applicant and the siting analyst both have access to it. And so they're kind of having these conversations back and forth about an RAI in the one tracking sheet rather than a million emails back and forth. And it's a good place to track, what has been submitted, when it was submitted, if it was the correct thing that they were looking for in their analysis or not, and if it needs to be resubmitted. And that's really helped a lot in tracking those additional information requests. And then you see Tom almost every month, sometimes for multiple items. So just kind of a call out to, the massive undertaking of the different rulemakings that are taking place are really a big piece of our overall division process improvement. And then the other piece, which it's such a small line item, but it really has taken a lot of time, is standardized templates for operational site inspections and annual reporting. That is a piece that the compliance team as a whole really worked on, but I led a lot of those efforts and has been instrumental in making our annual process review a significantly more streamlined process. It's created a kind of, we're looking at massive amounts of documents sometimes for each of these facilities, and streamlining that has helped make that entire process a little bit more approachable and a lot easier for everybody involved. Next slide, please. So moving into our in-progress tasks, there was also a number of tasks that were started this year and for various reasons either have not been fully completed or did get put on hold. One of the big ones being our comment portal updates due to some IT turnover and some kind of Microsoft issues mostly. Our comment portal updates were kind of put on hold, but that project is anticipated to be revisited and kind of taken on again for this next fiscal year and see if we can come up with something that's a little bit more user friendly for everybody. Desk manuals, also more commonly known as standard operating procedures, are kind of internal processes and outlining, what we're doing and why we're doing it. Those we've started updating some of those, but that's again an ongoing project that's not completed yet. A lot of these, like our project management tools and processes, again, are things that are outlined every year, but realistically are just going to be an ongoing process for the team. Our update of printed handouts, that is one that we've completed some of the different handouts, as you can see on the table over there. You can also see on our website, trying to make them more ADA friendly, especially for e-readers, as well as just more visually friendly and easier to digest the information. I know this is a pretty complicated process, and so continuing to try and figure out how to revise those public-facing templates and handouts so that it's easier for somebody who doesn't really understand anything about the process to come in and digest what it is, how they can participate, how they can find more information. And the ODOCOMS team has been really invaluable in helping with that process and taking a look at and redesigning some of our different public-facing templates. And will continue working closely with us in this coming year to revise more of them. And then document managed cleanup is, again, another item that's just kind of an ongoing forever process. We have so many documents for so many different sites, and obviously with every iteration of kind of team of staff over time, there has been better or worse document management. So we've been going through and cleaning up a lot of our historic documents more than anything to make sure it's easier to find and understand kind of our own internal like history of different facilities. And that's just kind of a project that we're just continuously working on as we find old files that maybe don't make sense or don't fit our current naming convention properly, cleaning those up so it's easier for us to find in the future when we're going back to look for things. Next slide, please. So that's kind of what we have done and some of what we'll continue doing. And then you'll notice kind of some of these tasks I've previously mentioned. We'll continue to create and update kind of one-pagers. We have a couple different ideas for those, and some of them will be specifically for the public. We also want to create some one-page kind of handouts specifically for other reviewing agencies to better understand, again, what it is we're looking for from them when we send them information and requests for review. And then kind of continuing to create one-pagers for the public that can help identify different processes within the overall citing process so that the public can better participate and understand where participation is like allowed or welcomed within this process. Again, our document management cleanup, updating our applicant guide is going to be one of the bigger projects we take on this year. Again, complicated process. There's a lot that goes into these applications. And so really working with the team to kind of create something dynamic that will be easy to update over time and keep up to date as different rules change is something we'll be working with comms, possibly IT, and then within our internal team to identify what should go into an applicant guide so that it is easier to understand what needs to be submitted and when. And then again, creating more internal process documentation so that there's kind of better fidelity of information over time and that it's not just living, this person understands this process and can explain it to you, but we don't necessarily have it documented. So if that person leaves, then we kind of lose our understanding of a process. So we're really working on to make sure that we have all of our processes internally documented appropriately. Again, updating or changing our comment portal in some way to make it a little bit more user-friendly and easier on our end to download and process those comments. And then the kind of continuing project management and project tracking, and exploring and implementing AI tools where appropriate. Next slide, please. So those were kind of what we plan on doing for this next year. And then, like I said, in our future work plans, we'll be kind of reassessing what our current goals are and those tasks within those goals. We'll also be conducting an internal survey that seemed to work really well this year to kind of get the whole division's feedback on what they were seeing as priority projects. So it wasn't, just done in a vacuum. And then kind of continuing to build off of this year's items. So projects that maybe weren't completed or were kind of a phase 1 will then get into phase 2 for next year. Along with kind of our just ongoing types of projects. Any questions or ideas? I'd love to hear if council's seeing anything that you all would like us to be working on.
Councillor Beyer.
So this is kind of generated by today's public comments. As we generate public facing material, it's almost like a mini advisory committee of public folks to say, does this resonate with you? Does it answer your questions? And I don't know how we convene such a group, so this is just a wild hair, but just to say, does this work for you? Because we spend a lot of energy trying to make the process easier, but if it's not resonating, it's like the comment on the maps. I also really appreciated calling out the process for the request for additional information. My guess is that involves a lot of time for the siting analysts and the applicants, and needs to be considered as we do this evaluation of the whole process. The more we can set our expectations for what we expect from the developers, so that request for additional information piece is more streamlined. Not that we don't want the information, but that the expectations are up front, if that makes sense. But I'm really pleased to see that method being evaluated. And finally, thanks for all your work on these really complex issues and the other duties as assigned, because you've had a load this year.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's pretty loud.
Secretary Gurnett.
Can I respond to that? Yeah, I think it is a good idea, that when we're trying to do, work that actually has value or that we're intending to have value for the public, trying to get their feedback to make sure that that's the case. And we've done that in the past in varying ways. So when we did the public guide originally, it's been a few years now, we reached out to a lot of different people and said, please review this, get us your comments back, because we want it to be not just, this is how we see it, we understand it. We want people who are actually taking that on and then, doing it. And so there are people who, are more sort of frequently participating in our process. Those people are obvious. I think sometimes though, you get like a new project in a new location and new members of the public, and it's not like we can reach out to them because we don't know who they are. They're not interested in our process yet. They will be. So part of this is, being thoughtful and doing exactly what you said, but then being kind of iterative in nature, getting the feedback, hearing from people and then making those adjustments kind of along the way, which again, going back to today's comments on the mapping on public notices, those were good comments, and we're going to take those into, serious consideration into future maps.
Councillor Howell.
Ms. Bartley, that it's a very complex program that you're grabbing onto here, and it was a very comprehensive improvement plan that you've got going. I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll echo that and really compliment you on the materials that we received in the PowerPoint presentation with the status today and then what's moving forward. Very, very helpful. So kudos.
Thank you.
Councillor Beyer.
I have more questions, but I like the idea of the templates that you're developing, so just put that away. And this is related, but not so related. We got a notice of ODO budget hearings, I think earlier in June or July. If we could get an update next month on how things are looking for the siting division, just out of curiosity, knowing there's always another legislative session, but making sure that these efforts have the resources they need to really accomplish those goals.
Secretary Cornett, did you have a comment or no?
No, but I will. I'm just going to make note of that into the next month's secretary report right now so that I can put that in there because we are in that budget development phase and we're submitting kind of our budget materials like within the next week. So, I mean, obviously the budget won't conclude until July a year from now. So we won't know the, you know, the total outcome for another year, but we will know what at least we're proposing, what we're hearing back, kind of what the nature of the budget is looking like. So I'll try to provide as much information as I can next month.
And I just want to add, members of this council are members of the public, and some of us are coming in for the first time. And if you see things in the materials that we get or that you see out to the public, I think BB and others would love to hear if there needs to be improvement. You know, when we're looking at the material and saying, hey, from this side trying to look in, I don't have what I need. I think it's important that we communicate that as well.
Yes, absolutely. I always appreciate feedback. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. And when you stare at these materials all day, it seems obvious. And then you go back and look at it and you're like, oh, this did not make any sense, or we missed these typos, or it's hard when you're looking at it all day, every day. But hearing outside feedback and outside input allows us to be a lot more effective in what we're developing. So
great, thank you. Any other comments, questions from council members? That
concludes my
your
presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation and really the comprehensive material.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, yes. So, moving on to our next item, which is Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm. This is
Chair
an
Condon.
action. Oh, sorry.
Just, it's 12:09. We're obviously running behind on the agenda. Lunch is here. We can move forward, stick with the kind of agenda or the timeline is proposed, or we can adjust a little bit, take a 15-minute break to kind of grab a working lunch and come back to that one, whatever the council members are feeling like.
About working lunch.
Denise Calderon on record approves.
We've got some travelers here. Okay, working lunch. We'll grab lunch. It is here, isn't it? Yes. Okay. And then come back and we'll get started again. Thank you.